I've had the GT4 now about 3 to 4 months, and I figured it's a perfect time to do a comparison with the 981 GTS. I've really been quite amazed how different the same chassis can be, and they both do their own thing extremely well. They're just such starkly different vehicles, and I've got a full list, going through the different topics, through the engine, transmission, suspension, brakes, and so on, and other quirky items, and really try to compare them. And to be honest, you can't really pick one over the other. They both do a fantastic job. It's just a question of what you prefer, really. So let's get right to it. So let's start with one of the more important aspects, really, which is just the powertrain in general. I mean, the engine. And that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to also change from the GTS to the GT4, is because I wanted that little bit more power. And I always felt like the GTS was just, that 30, 40 horsepower, not enough. And this was supposed to really kind of fill that gap in. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I was slightly underwhelmed with that delta in power. It is more powerful, that's for sure. But I was kind of really expecting, going from a GTS to a GT product, that it was going to be that little, it was going to kind of blow me away a little bit. But I don't know if it's the gearing, the transmission compared to the PDK or something like that. But there was something about the 3.4 litre in the GTS that was just, it felt like a small, agile and nimble engine. It revved out really nice. It had a great sound. It was kind of, also the reactiveness on the throttle was just, in sport mode, was incredible, just immediate. Don't get me wrong. The 3.8 litre from the Carrera S, it definitely has more power. It's a bigger engine, it's got more torque, you can tell that. But it also feels like that's been traded off with more inertia. It's slightly more sluggish compared to the 3.4 litre, and just missing that sort of that crispness on the throttle that you really had in the GTS. So there's a slight downside there, but you can tell really, like in the higher gears, especially when you're in the highway kind of rolling. I can be in 6th gear and put my foot down, and you can just tell that there's kind of more there. So it's definitely a more versatile engine across all the RPM range. So that kind of offsets a little bit of the transmission gearing that's slightly longer. The GT4 does make a great sound though. It's definitely more, it's deeper. It's kind of just more has more layers to it somehow. But what I will say, which I think this is quite telling, in the GTS, I never used to open the windows to hear it. With this, I do sometimes. It's because in the GTS, it was so loud, and you just didn't have to open the windows. Which is quite surprising, because the sound deadening in here, there must be less sound deadening. That's all I'll say. It's much more. You can hear a lot more of kind of the stones being picked up, the auxiliary belt and all the other functions, and the gearbox. It's all much more kind of visceral and just more pronounced. But the GTS exhaust note, and some of the intake as well, I'm sure, was just so pronounced. But still, I mean, wow. Such an amazing sound. Just enjoy this for a second. Bouncing off the walls here. And the tunnel. Jesus. Wow. to answer the big question in the end, like if I had to choose between the 3.4 or the 3.8, of course I would choose the 3.8. It does have more power. But if you were expecting a big difference, like a real step change in power, I think you just need to manage your expectations just a little bit. And I think that explains it pretty well, I think. Now let's talk about the transmission, which usually would be pretty useless because the manual in the other Caymans is the same as the one on the GT4. There's really no differences, but I think because the GT4 only comes in manual, I think it's worth talking about, what you could have the PDK in the other ones and not in this. And I mean, I've said it kind of before, and so has anyone else, the gearing is for sure long. It's particularly noticeable between first to third. I would say the rest of the gears, like fourth, fifth, and sixth, I wouldn't actually change. The cruising RPM at 120 kilometers an hour is about 3,000 RPM, which that is the right RPM. It should not be higher. It shouldn't be above 3,000 really. So, and in hairpins like this, I mean, I'm going down to first, which I would also do in the PDK, but it is long. But the action is amazing. I mean, the feel in the linkage is gorgeous. The clutch feel is spot on. It's not hard. It's not too light. They've nailed it there. But if I could have this car in the PDK for the same money, I think I would. Either you want a manual or you don't, really. That's kind of the thing. And the GT4 doesn't give you that option, which I think is I would say it's a slight oversight from Porsche's side. But if there was ever a manual, I mean, this is kind of it's kind of one of the best ones, really. Apart from the gearing, it really is almost perfect. The rev matching feature maybe feels like a little bit of a gimmick to some people, but I think it's absolutely incredible. It is millimeter perfect with its gear changes, and just makes you feel like an absolute hero. It really is. I mean, heel and toe is cool, and if you're good enough to do it, there's nothing stopping you. But what I do wish it wasn't tied to like a sport button, because the sport button doesn't do a lot, and I'll talk about that later. But I wish I could have the rev matching without the different cooling strategy. That's a good segue onto what the sport mode actually does, because you definitely got more for your money on the GTS or any other Cayman really, with kind of the sport chrono and so on. In the GTS, it did the throttle map, the PDK calibration if you had it, the cooling strategy, and then it also did the dynamic engine mounts. While on the GT4, all you get is the cooling strategy and the rev matching. And I really wish you could kind of separate those two. I want to be able to just have the rev matching without my engine running, 15 degrees cooler. I wish that was an option I could have. On the GTS, it really did feel like you had two different cars. I mean, from normal to sport was going from like a comfortable, quiet cruiser to quite aggressive and, pops and bangs and incredible throttle response. Really, it is a completely different animal. While the GT4, it's just, you're always at a much higher level. And the difference is subtle. I mean, even with the valve for the exhaust, I can tell a very subtle difference. It's nowhere near like it was on the GTS, to be honest, which is a little bit of a shame, I think. So we've spoken about the engine and the transmission. The next thing is going to be the steering and the suspension. And those really are some of the things that are so noticeable when you first get into the car. I mean, when I went to test drive the GT4 the first time, I went with the GTS, so within 5 minutes I had an A to B comparison, and the difference in just the steering response, it was so direct and precise. It made the GTS feel like just a wafty cruiser in comparison. It really was surprisingly shocking, and it makes the whole experience so much nicer, and I can imagine on track it's just going to make even more sense, so I'm really looking forward to that. The suspension, it's around 50% stiffer at the front and around 70% stiffer at the rear compared to the rest of the Caymans. I say roughly because obviously it depends if you have the PASM or the X73 suspension, but it's certainly noticeably stiffer, but it doesn't really rattle your bones that much. I mean, the GT4 only comes with the PASM, so you've got the standard, which is, for sure much stiffer, but again, it's relatively comfortable actually, especially, I'm in on sort of alpine roads, and even the odd bump or pothole or something is really not that bad. But and then when you press the sport mode, there is a noticeable difference. You can tell it's much firmer, but again, it's still actually quite adequate for the street, really. So I can't complain actually about either setting. So when you combine the suspension and the steering, those two together just completely transform the dynamics of the car. I mean, if you thought the standard Cayman was like a nice, agile and nimble car, I mean, the GT4 really is something else. I mean, you can forget about the engine. It's the chassis really which really makes the difference here. And the next thing really is the brakes. The number one downside of the GTS really was the brakes, and it's finally been resolved with this car. The GTS brakes, they felt kind of mushy, and it didn't really matter with the new bleed, and I tried different pads as well, and they're good by sports car standards, don't get me wrong, but I also suffered a little bit of fade on the Nürburgring, and I've also suffered it on mountain passes like this coming down the hill. And with the GT4, now that it has basically the GT3 front end, the feel is just night and day. I mean, it's finally stiff. It's a real firm but progressive pedal feel. You get that reassurance basically that no matter if I'm going to be on track or if I'm going down a mountain, it's basically going to be able to support me. And that's really what I've missed. And look, if the GTS had these brakes, I probably would have kept it. The bite is there instantly. These are not the original pads though in this car, so I can't judge the feel if that's specific to these or the original ones, but you might have seen in a previous video, these ones squeal a lot, which I'm hoping to resolve that a little bit with the next pad. But yeah, it's all about the brakes and the steering. The GTS and the GT4 have adopted two different aerodynamic philosophies. Where the GTS targets efficiency and stability, the GT4 has prioritized downforce with a large single-element rear wing and a more pronounced front splitter. Both models have a relatively flat underbody, but the GT4 has a slight resemblance of a rear splitter as well. The result is a relatively low downforce of 12 kilograms at the front and 31 kilograms at the rear at 200 kilometers an hour, which is certainly better than the almost zero downforce generated on the GTS model. Just aesthetically, having the wing behind you, it just creates a different sensation to the car. I mean, there is something slightly special about having a GT product compared to a GTS. Even if they're equally great cars, there is something just slightly special about the way it looks and those things. So I really got to commend Porsche in the way that they've styled this thing. So going on to the interior, this is something I mentioned in the GTS video. If you've got a GTS with a GTS spec interior, you've basically got a GT product. This, in fact, my GTS spec was slightly better than this. I've still got the leather with the coloured stitches, but I've got the standard kind of basic silver trim, which a lot of the GT4s had. I couldn't find one really with the carbon. Well, my GTS had the carbon, but the interior is mostly the same. The most noticeable difference really is the steering wheel. Having the .2 steering wheel I much prefer the styling. I really dislike the kind of the 981 19 and 1.1 steering wheel styling. It looked really quite outdated. This I think won't really age half as fast as the other one did. It just feels nicer actually. I read a book recently, a very famous one actually, called Unsafe at Any Speed from 1965, I think. And in that book, they specifically call out that you shouldn't put shiny silver parts, like on steering wheels or large trim panels. And that's exactly what Porsche have done here. And these flat surfaces right here, the sun has reflected into my eyes from these surfaces. I don't get why you would do that. So, if I could, I would actually change the color or maybe make them matte or something. I think the newer 982 GT products did actually have like a matte black option, I think. But because this silver is just really a little bit silly, to be honest. Here we go. So good, so fucking good. So much rawer. The ESC and traction control calibration, I can't say much, to be honest. I can definitely tell that the thresholds have been pushed out a little bit on the GT4, and it just doesn't intervene as much. It could be just because I have way more grip, and obviously it comes with the Sport Cup 2 tires. But I've noticed that even when it does slip, it just doesn't intervene quite as quickly as it did in the rest of the Cayman range. But really on track is where I'm going to be able to kind of provide that judgment. The other big thing, no start-stop. How great is that? I was not expecting it to not have start-stop. It's just one less thing to kind of worry about, really. So really, really happy about that. Sorry, I'm having to work a little bit hard here. I wanted a club sport car because of the harness points, the pre-cut carpets, and obviously the roll cage. And the roll cage does squeak a bit sometimes. Now, it is only on kind of really, really rough roads. So in Europe, if you're familiar with like cobbled streets and stuff, that thing is going to rattle. In all other conditions, it doesn't really rattle, so it's not really a problem. But it kind of took me by surprise the first time, and then I Googled it and I realized this is what everybody talks about, that they just kind of rattle a bit, so. Both the GTS and the GT4 are fantastic cars, and they do two different tasks extremely well. And that's something that I didn't expect, and I really appreciate now, like kind of how good the GTS was in certain tasks. It was such a good all-rounder. It was also practical. It was just, it kind of did everything really well. But it had those few downsides, like the slight lack of power, the brakes, which were kind of lacking. That the GT4 really fills in those points, and it's difficult. It would be very difficult to go back. That's all.